Morning. Good morning. Good to see everybody. I was just in the back thinking that this is my fourth season in this role coming up, and that at the end of this season I will have completed the equivalent of a presidential term. I'll leave it to you to decide who has the better approval rating between President Biden and John McDaid. Hopefully you're not compelled to reuse one of Commissioner Sankey's expressions from yesterday, race to the bottom. Fairly straightforward presentation this year. I'm bringing more video. In fact, I'm bringing solely video to you this year, and I don't really have a lot of slides with statistics on it. And if you're anything like my officials, that's going to make you happy. But we'll get into it here with the topics I'll be talking about. The recap from last year, the 2022 season, talk about new playing rules. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I evaluate our officiating program from year to year. And this is where I'll use some of the video, and then we'll have a wrap up. The statistics really haven't changed a lot when I look at it in a 5-year window. And that's why I'm not really bringing you a lot of graphs this year. I'll talk about the 5 or 6 statistics we talk about every year that we use to assess where we are in the state of the game. Scoring at FBS level for the 22 season, 54.7 points per game. The SEC was slightly higher at that at 56.2 points per game. We're off about 5% at the national level. We're off about 5% from last year, but it's been relatively flat for the 3 years prior to that. Plays per game, 178 plays per game nationally, 177 in the SEC. This is the lowest in the last 5 years, but the high and low for the last 5 years has only been a difference of about 4 plays per game. Average game time at 321. In the SEC was 325. This has been oscillating for a 10-year period with a high of about 324 and a low of about 316. That tells me we're kind of in a steady state. Year over year, 6 minutes difference might be a lot, but we virtually haven't changed inside this band of between 324 and 316 for 10 years. Fouls per game, 4.1. Across FBS last year, we had 4.7 in the SEC. The high and low here over the 5-year period has been 14.5 down to 14.1. Replay stops per game. It has been at 2.2 for 5 of the last 7 years. This tells me it's rather flat as well. We're at 2.4 stops per game in the SEC for the 22 season. And lastly, targeting per game. This has come down significantly. At the FBS level, we've had consecutive year-over-year reductions of 35% and 25% for a total of a 68% decrease in targetings per game across the FBS level. It was at 0.16 per game at the FBS level last year. That's a little bit one per just more than 6 every 6 games. We were at 0.11 in the SEC. It's 1 every 9 games. So not a lot of change statistically in the game. And as you would imagine, we haven't really had a lot of rule change year over year. This is a off year, which means that we're only going to address safety issues. We have the ability to address image of the game issues. And we have the ability to address recent rule changes that didn't quite work out like we wanted. As an example, last year we had a fairly significant change in blocking below the waist rules. They went and evaluated the effectiveness of that rule change from the 22 season. The Rules Committee liked where it is. They haven't done anything with it. There was something that happened this offseason that is fairly, I don't want to say unusual, but doesn't happen necessarily each and every year. There was a committee that was stood up by the Board of Managers, the CFO, to study the timing of the game for the purposes of looking at game duration in game time, but more importantly, game duration in the number of plays. This committee was made up of athletic administrators. There were some commissioners, athletic directors, other athletic administration types on the panel. Representation from the coaches from AFCA, Mr. Todd Berry, and there were some individuals related to FBS officiating that were on this committee. And The study they did is informed the Playing Rules Committee on what they eventually came up with were timing rule differences. I do want to underscore this. There is not concern about game times averaging 3:21. There is concern for game times that are 3:45 and greater. Similarly, there's not necessarily concern for games that average 180 plays a game. There is concern for games that have 200 plus plays per game. And there is a number of them each and every year in each and every conference. The first rule change has to do with, I can't even see my slides here, so I'm going to turn around here. We used to have rules that said if we had a foul that occurred during a play where time expired at the end of a quarter, and the penalty for that foul was accepted, we would extend that quarter for an untimed down before we changed to go to the next quarter. We're no longer going to do that for the first and third quarters. We're just going to, if we accept the penalty, we're going to flip the field, enforce it, and then go from there. The second rule change that is of the same ilk is that we're no longer going to allow teams to request multiple charge timeouts during the same dead ball period. This most prevalently plays out when a team is trying to so-called freeze a kicker for a field goal attempt. If a team calls a charge timeout, they need to wait for the ball to be snapped again before they can request another timeout, should they have any left. These two rule changes address overall game time. They do not address, they will not impact the number of plays in a game. Conversely, the third rule change is the one that everyone's talking about, and that is that we will no longer stop a clock except for the, under 2 minutes in each half when we have a first down inbounds. And we do have first downs out of bounds. We still will stop the clock there because the play ended out of bounds, and we'll start when the ball's ready for play back out at the succeeding spot. We don't do that, obviously, under 2 minutes. This basically duplicates the rule that we see in the National Football League. The committee discussed other changes to the timing rules for the purposes of driving down the number of plays per game. This is the only one that they have adopted. There were several reasons for that, but one of the more compelling reasons is I'll use the analogy of a doctor prescribing medication. The doctor doesn't want to prescribe too much medication right out of the gate because if there's a change in the patient, you don't know which medication is attributed to what. So we have this rule change for this year. We're going to see what effect it has on our game from an overall number of plays. Obviously, if you decrease the number of plays, you're probably also going to drive down the game time. But the impetus for this rule change was to address the number of plays in our game. We do have there's editorial changes every year in the rule book, and primarily they're there to clarify. Maybe there's some language that has to do with a rule where in trying to interpret it from an officiating standpoint, it's not necessarily clear what the rules makers had as intent, and so there's an editorial change to come in and clarify. Sometimes we have an editorial rule change that effectively is a rule change, and we do have one this year that falls under that category, and we have at least one play from the SEC last year that was a impetus for making this editorial change. For running and roughing into the kicker, the standard of when those rules are in effect is when it's obvious a scrimmage kick is going to be made and before the kicker carries or possesses the ball outside of the tackle box. Let me go back to the first standard. The standard of it's obvious a kick will be made. It's not the most specific of standards. You put 10 officials in a room, show them a play, and say, is it obvious that a kick's going to be made here when a kicker's under duress? And you're probably going to get a 40-60, maybe even a 50-50 split. The second, no longer in effect when the ball is carried outside of the tackle box. That was put in place approximately 10 years ago to address rugby-style kickers. that if they carried the ball outside of the box before kicking it, they no longer get running and roughing protection. The change this year is they're going to add a third standard, and that is not only are the running and roughing rules not into effect if the ball's carried outside the tackle box, which is 5 yards laterally, if the kicker possesses or carries the ball more than 5 yards behind his original position at the snap, they are no longer, those protections of running and roughing are no longer in effect. Let me show you a play from last year that illustrates why this editorial change was made. You can see we have a snap well over the kicker's head. And if we play it back from the beginning and you watch the ball, it follows those inbound lines at the top of the screen, which tells you that ball is still in the tackle box. And the definition of the tackle box is 5 yards laterally from the position where the ball is snapped, all the way back to the end line behind the offense. So in this particular play last year, the ball was in the tackle box, and it came down to the standard, is it obvious a kick is going to be made? Our official had a flag down for roughing the kicker, and I asked him after the game, why did you believe running and roughing were in play? And he said, I never had the kicker possessing the ball and showing any intent to run, and I had the defender coming in, not making any effort to block the kick, but just to contact the kicker. And that's fairly reasonable to me. If that's the two judgments he brought to bear to try to determine is it obvious the kick's going to be made, I supported him on that. But in looking at this play this past offseason, the caretakers of the game said, maybe this doesn't meet the spirit of the rules to give him protection in this particular instance. So the editorial change comes into play here. Obviously, the kicker possesses the ball more than 5 yards behind his original position. He will no longer be afforded protection for running and roughing. He could be fouled with an unnecessary roughness foul, but on this particular play, I don't think we have that here. So with this editorial change, this play from last year would be no foul. The correct call would be no foul. All right, can we toggle back to our slides? I said I would talk a little bit about how I evaluate our officiating program, how I evaluate a season once we get into the winter. We have metrics that we use. We grade every game. Every flag that's thrown, we grade whether it's correct or incorrect. If we don't have a flag thrown, we evaluate whether or not we missed a foul that we should have had a flag down. We have two main ratios we use from those statistics. If I'm talking about a specific official, what's your ratio of your correct calls to incorrect calls? And what's your ratio of correct calls to your missed calls? In the replay booth, we look at things like, what's your percentage of correct outcomes? What's the number of missed stops we had where there's compelling video evidence that we should have stopped the game, but we failed to do so? What's the number of reviews we have that are longer than 2 minutes? And what's our overturn percentage? The reason we measure overturns is replay is predicated on the idea of correcting obvious errors. It's also predicated on the notion that we're looking to stop the game only when there's compelling video evidence to do so. And so if you're stopping the game and let's say 80% of the time you're either confirming or you're going with stands, we're stopping the game too much. We're interjecting ourselves into the game, impacting the flow of the game, and not coming out with any different ruling than what was ruled on the field. Nominally, we're looking for an overturn percentage that's least in the 40 percentile to be considered a successful year in the replay booth. So I do all this, and I have one-on-ones with all our officials, and they get feedback from the season, and they get these statistics back depending on whether they're on-field official or replay official. But there's another way I evaluate the season. That's what I want to talk to you about today, and that is, what were our rough spots during the season, and what created those rough spots? And there's basically two categories that usually, when I look at those rough spots, they fall into one. Our mission every game, we want to be perfect. It's not reasonable to expect we're going to be perfect. It's not even reasonable to expect. We had, I believe, 105 games that an SEC crew officiated last year. It's not even reasonable to expect that one of those games was going to be perfect, right? What we're trying to do is make sure that any incorrect or missed calls that we have don't create a critical pivot point in the game that directly contributes to the outcome of the game. What does that mean? If we're going to miss a call, it's much better to do so in the first quarter than it is late in the fourth quarter in a one-score game. So I'm going to show you a bunch of video here now, and we'll go over, Ryan. So this is, we'll just stop it right here. Let me talk a little about this. The first category of what challenges us is, where is the game evolving the quickest? And whatever parts of the game are evolving the quickest, that's creating a challenge for us, because we're trying to have officiating stay ahead of that. We're trying to be consistent with our officiating. And if the game evolves so quickly that we're starting to see things we've never seen before, it's hard to get 100+ officials all on the same page if it's changing week in and week out. The first scenario is the tactics that the defense is using pre-snap. And in this video here, we're going to watch several things, and Ryan's going to play it back and forth. We're going to watch this backer first right here. You can see, by the way, right there, he's giving some kind of cue to his teammates to what we call stem, change their lateral position. We're going to watch these three plus this end here. They're all going to change their lateral position, right? And then we're going to watch the offense to see how they react. The standards that come into play here, there's only 3. The offense has 1. They can't make any movement that simulates the start of the snap before the start of the snap. On defense, they have 2 standards. They can't do anything that's an unnatural part of the game that's done to get their opponent to false start. Nor can they use any kind of signal that emulates the signal the offense is using to start their play. So this particular offense is using a clap cadence. So if this backer is using a verbal cue, it stands to reason he's not using a signal that is trying to emulate his opponent. The stemming here, I don't see anything that resembles doing something. This is a part of the game, right? I don't see any extra hand motions, stomping of a foot. This end that collapses down, he's not doing any, he's going down in a 3-point stance. We need to evaluate all of this when this happens each and every time, and we need to do it consistently such that what we create, if the foul here would be delay game defense, if we were to have a foul. Every time we call delay game defense or don't call delay game defense, it's consistent from game in and game out. And we got to give fair protection to the offense here. Go to the next play, Ryan. Watch what's going on here and to our left on the line. This doesn't resemble football. This is movement that is done for the purposes of trying to get your opponent to false start. Go to the next one, Ryan. We're going to watch this backer right here, number 32, just inside the line to gain. And right there, he starts clapping. That's crept into our game, right? In this particular play, when I look at it, I don't think it's intentional by this backer. I think he's legitimately trying to get his teammates' attention. But again, the standards don't necessarily speak to what's fair here. And we need to come up with an interpretation that says if this backer claps like this, it's clear the ball's snapped because of this clapping. What is the equitable thing to do? Next play, it's even crept in. We're going to watch this coach up here on the sideline. Might be tough for you to see. Right there, he starts clapping. And watch the snap. It's his clapping that causes the ball to be snapped. One of the challenges we have in this part of the game is that our mechanics for decades didn't account for having eyes on all 11 defensive players prior to the snap. We have examples now where safeties, players off the line of scrimmage, and in this particular instance, a coach on the sideline, clapping, which emulates their opponent's offensive cadence and causing the ball to be snapped early. This part of the game is evolving. Actually, there's one more play I'm going to show you. Defense in the neutral zone, and we'll see the snapper here just reach out. What's he trying to do? He's trying to create a dead ball, offside defense contact into the neutral zone. The Defensive offside rules are such that if you go in the neutral zone causing your opponent directly above you, or if you're head up on someone, each opponent on either side, they're protected from false starting. If they false start because you come into the neutral zone, it's offside. It's not a false start. This snapper, this center, is trying to get an offside call by virtue of reaching out and touching this defender. But is that reaching out and touching that defender, is it a false start? Or is it just an action to basically buy himself an offside? All of these things are changing rapidly in our game. A lot of these things I just showed you in the last 5 plays, we didn't see 5 years ago. We didn't necessarily see 4 years ago. We work hard to create consistency when the game changes as quickly, but it creates rough spots for us. Let's go to the next play. Next thing we're going to talk about is defensive holding. And before we watch the video, it wasn't too long ago that contact downfield, legal contact downfield between defender and a receiver was up around the shoulders. Jams were up in the shoulders, on the side of the shoulder, into the arms. What we're seeing is more action down around the waist, clutching at the pants, clutching at the belt line, clutching at the jersey that's like in the small of the back for the purposes of upsetting the route that the receiver's running. Let's watch these plays. We're going to watch the number 2 receiver in the slot at the bottom. Clearly grabbed around the waist. We play it a couple times. Watch the quarterback. He has eyes on him. That's where he wants to go with the ball. We put a flag down for defensive holding here, and it was a correct call. Let's look at the next play. We're going to watch this receiver in motion. And we're going to have a replay here on TV. We call defensive hold here. It's a clutch of a jersey. It's not big. And some of you are probably already thinking, this resembles a play that was a pretty critical play in last year's Super Bowl, late in the game. It's almost identical to that play. A defensive hold was called that basically allowed the team to retain possession and to win the game. Go to the next play. We're going to watch this halfback that's at the bottom of the screen release. Defender goes and reaches around his waist. But unlike the first play I showed you, go back and, do we really have a restriction here? Is there a point in time where we can say that the defender takes a step away from the receiver by that clutching around his waist, that he takes him off his route, right? We have a flag on this one. I did not support this flag. Even though the defender did put his arm around the belt line, he doesn't really have any material effect on what happened on the receiver. This action by defenders, the clutching of the jersey at the belt line, at the pants, we're seeing more and more of. It's challenging us, and we need to work hard to create frameworks and judgments for our officials to create consistency. Go to the next play, Ryan. We're going to talk about defensive technique here for a second. Let's go back, and we're going to watch the number 1 receiver at the top of the screen. This defender is, I'll call this the bail technique. More than a generation ago, this is how we played defensive secondary football, right? We kept the receiver in front of us at all times. And this is a man-on-man, one-on-one assignment at the top of the screen. He's bailing to keep deeper than the receiver in front of him. And he plays the ball and is able to get in front of him on an underthrown ball and intercept it. Go to the next play. We're going to watch the defender over the number 2 receiver at the bottom of the slot. He's going to use what we call a catch technique. And his technique here is to wait for the top of the route or the break in the route from the receiver. If he's going to cut out or in, that would be the top of the route. He wants to get a jam in there to upset his pattern. If he's going to go on a post or a corner route, he wants to get a jam at the break to upset his route. And then he's going to play him one-on-one. And you'll notice his technique that once he catches him, he gets on his hip and runs stride for stride downfield. Go to the next play. Watch at the top of the screen. This is what a catch route looks like when the defender gets fooled. And go back. He's trying to get a jam at the break at the top for the post route. Gets his hips swiveled the wrong direction. He's clearly beat. Unlike the previous play, where the defender gets the jam in at the break and is on his hip running stride for stride. This defender gets beat. And you can see he's trying to play catch up now. Go to the next play. This is what we're seeing more and more of. One-on-one coverage at the bottom of the screen with a jam technique. He wants to jam him, get underneath him, and stay on his hip from an underneath position. And one of the ways the game is evolving from the way it's officiated is 3 or 4 years ago, if I showed this play to officials, they would say this defender is beat. Well, this defender is doing exactly what his technique, what his coach is teaching him, the technique the coach wants him to use. Get on that hip from an underneath position and run with him stride for stride down the field. So when this pass is underthrown and the receiver's trying to slow up to come back and get the pass, who's creating contact against whom? The defender's not beat. He's not playing the ball, I'll grant you that, but he's not beat. Is it fair to create a defensive pass interference call here? Or is it fair to say this is nothing? The defender has his position on the field fairly. He's running stride for stride on the hip of that receiver. It's the underthrown ball that creates this contact, and it's no harm, no foul either way. Go to the next play. This defender at the bottom of the screen also wants to jam and run, but he gets fooled. He doesn't know who to jam, and he is beat. He's not on his hip, and he's trying to make up that distance. The ball is underthrown, the receiver slows down, and now he creates contact. I don't believe this play is a foul because of the timing. The timing's just not there. But the defender in that position isn't the same as the defender in the previous position. These are the things that coaches come to about making sure we understand the technique, the strategy they're trying to use, and make sure our officiating is matching. Next play, Ryan. This is the last play I have for you. We're seeing a lot of this. There is nothing in the college game that prevents you from having a formation where there's an ineligible player uncovered. So think about a tackle where there's no receiver on the line of scrimmage outside of him. If you do this, you have to have an eligible number covered up somewhere, or you're going to have 5 players in the offensive backfield, which is an illegal formation. But there's nothing to prevent you from doing this. Offenses are getting really creative and trying to create situations to deceive the defense. So before we even start this play, this appears to be what? This appears to be 3 receivers outside of the tackle at the bottom of the screen with an end at the bottom of the screen, a slot just inside of him, and then a wing back off that tackle up there. We have 2 players obviously in the backfield, and then we have a receiver that we're going to assume is on the line of scrimmage at the top of the screen. That would create a legal formation with a slot at the bottom, the wing back, the running back, and the quarterback as the 4 players in the offensive backfield. Let's go ahead and put the shift on, Ryan. Now we have a shift here down at the bottom of the screen. And so what we would do as officials is there doesn't appear to be any intent to deceive. Receiver at the top is on the line of scrimmage. What was the slot at the bottom now has moved onto the line, and so we're going to put the receiver at the bottom of the screen off the line. We still have 4 players in the offensive backfield, and everyone's good. Now let's go ahead and put this player in motion. Stop. By rule, you can only go in motion if you're a back, right? Prior to me putting him in motion, we said we're going to put him in a line of scrimmage to create a legal formation. Down at the bottom of the screen, I said we're going to put the number 2 receiver on the line, the number 1 receiver off the line. Well, if that's the case, we have 5 players in the offensive backfield when the ball's snapped here. What is the offense trying to do? The offense is trying to give an initial look that says that receiver at the top of the screen is on the line of scrimmage. And when they read that, the defense is going to say that receiver's anchored. They're going to come up with some kind of a defensive formation to account for that anchored receiver. But now when they send him in motion like this, they're trying to overflow the bottom of the screen with more offensive players with defensive players. That's what they're trying to do. This is putting a lot of pressure on us officials because on a regular formation, we don't get technical with what's a back and what's a lineman, right? We use the expression where the receivers are split out wide, a blade of grass. If I could put a blade of grass between 2 receivers, one's off the line, one's on the line. Well, we can't do that in these kinds of situations because there's the intent to deceive here. trying to legally, let's make sure we're on the same page. There are legal ways to deceive. Not all deception in football is illegal, right? But this deception crosses the line into something that's illegal, and it's putting a lot of pressure on our officials. All right, can we go back to the slides, Ryan? The second area, I told you that when I looked at the rough spots, there's two categories. The second categories are simply, we had an incorrect call or we had a missed call at a really key part of the game. I don't have any video on this, so for those of you that enjoy looking at train wrecks and plane crashes in YouTube, you're going to be disappointed. It's just plain that the timing of the incorrect call or the missed call was very unfortunate from the standpoint of the competitiveness of the game and the moment in the game that it happens. Our officials get an 11-game schedule each year. If you take the 180 average plays in a game, that's about 2,000 plays an official's going to work for me each and every season. If an official's been with me for about 5 years, and I'd say the average years of service for our staff is probably north of 5 years, that's 10,000 plays that official has worked in the SEC over that 5 years. When an official has an incorrect call or a missed call at a key moment in the game, I judge that official in the context of those 10,000 plays. And I say this for this reason. When that incorrect call or missed call occurs, and our television partner shows the play using 2, 3, 5 different camera angles, slow motion, multiple times, and the fan can discern that that was probably incorrect or that was probably a missed call, the court of public opinion judges that official using a sample size of 1. It's likely that if a quarterback goes out in Game 7 of a season and throws a couple of interceptions, that quarterback's not going to be evaluated by his coaching staff just on those 2 pass attempts. He's going to be evaluated on what did he do in the previous 6 games? What did he do for all the practices leading up to those 7 games? What did he do during the whole month of August during their camp? Similarly, that's how I judge our officials. They're rarely being judged in a sample size of 1 when they have an incorrect call or a missed call. They're being judged inside the thousands of plays they have on video that I've seen them while they've been with us on our staff. So as a wrap up, we have 9 crews in the SEC on field and replay. It's approximately 100 officials. We had 5 of our officials, 4 on field and 1 replay, be asked to join the National Football League this past off season. So we have new officials in their place. We also had 2 officials we had 5 officials that retired, 3 on the field and 2 in the replay booth. So there's a number of new faces that we have on the field. No real major recalibrations on our judgments year over year. No major rule changes. The one rule change with the timing doesn't really affect how we officiate the game. We just need to remember to not stop the clock if it's first down and bounds outside of 2 minutes in each half. Our clinic is next week in Birmingham. We'll hammer the fundamentals. We'll talk about these evolving parts of the game that I showed you here, with the expectation of trying to get everyone on the same page, that their frameworks of judgment, their mechanics, their standards are all similar so that we can create the consistency that the coaches are looking for. It's great to see everyone here today, and I wish you a very rewarding 2023 football season.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Here in a few minutes, we'll get started with our first coach of the day. Reminder that preseason All-SEC ballots will be emailed later this afternoon. You'll have to 5 o'clock on Thursday to submit your ballots in predicted order of finish, and we will get started momentarily.